All right. So today's lesson is about people who made some fascinating, some incredible finds, um, but were challenged by a supposed previous owner. Now the question is, does the finder become the keeper? So there's a few interesting case studies that we're going to go through, but I think it's going to largely depend on whether the supposed previous owner was actually an owner. So we're going to get to that. We're going to, get into this topic today, and along the way, we're going to be studying the Talmudic concept. Probably, I would say, from the top 10 discussed concepts in the entire Talmud, is a very, very broad but very important topic about how to acquire something. What is the process of acquisition of another item? So it may not be as simple as it sounds. The Talmud has very specific rules on how you can acquire something to become yours. How do you become an owner of something? So we're going to get into that topic today, according to the Jewish law. But first, as always, let's begin with a case study. We're going to view that on YouTube. I'm going to share my screen, and you guys will tell me your thoughts. I hope you guys can see everything.
Yeah.
In February 2016, Lindsay Haas from Issaquah, Washington, dined on seafood at an Italian restaurant. She bit on something unbiteable.
It was quite jarring. In fact, I thought I almost broke my tooth. It was so hard.
That turned out to be a rare quahog pearl worth some $600.
Wow.
To find a pearl in a clam is entirely natural while diving, but entirely uncommon while dining. It is natural, however, for the eatery owners not to clam up about the find and to lay claim to the treasure they unknowingly served. Is Lindsay the rightful owner of this pearl? What do you say?
Finders keepers.
So of course, never simple, never ever simple. What do you guys think? Who is the owner of the pearl, $600 pearl?
She is. Finders keepers.
Just as simple as that.
What does the Talmud say about ownership in terms of someone having a business and the, well, in this case, even the foodstuffs that are served?
Okay, that's exactly what we're going to be discussing very soon. What does it mean when you have a business and you serve food? Who's the real owner of these items?
Well, you didn't serve a pearl. You served.
Correct. So that's going to be the hot topic today. But at least let's try to get even a knee-jerk reaction as to what you guys think. Fran seems very adamant that it belongs to her, to the finder. Anyone think it belongs to the store owner?
She bought it. And
Okay.
she consumed it.
That's a good point.
Okay.
And if she didn't tell them about it, they
By the way,
wouldn't
she didn't
know.
pay for it yet. Just remember, she didn't get her bill yet.
Okay, but it was assumed that she would pay for it. Obviously, if she broke her tooth, she would have said, look what happened here. But her tooth didn't break.
So by the way, friend, so I guess my question is, do you mean that the restaurant owners never owned it?
Well, they did.
Because-
They purchased it.
Correct, meaning they obviously owned the seafood. That's obvious. So is it that they never owned it, or that the owners kind of gave over the ownership of the pearl by serving the food?
Yeah, and she consumed it.
Okay,
She also
Just
paid.
assumed.
She also paid for the food.
Yeah, she,
Right.
well, it's assumed that they will pay for the food.
right.
She ordered it, and I think that they give up ownership once they serve it to a customer. It becomes their food.
Right. So then I'm going to ask you a follow-up question now.
I guess I'm
Um,
wrong.
Let's assume, no. What's if, and her name is Lindsay, she's the finder. What if she found the same pearl under her table that she's sitting at in the restaurant? Now, obviously, it's pretty likely that this pearl would have been someone's pearl that fell out of their, purse or other piece of jewelry. So it goes without saying that Lindsay would have a moral obligation, a moral duty to find the previous owner. But at the same time, every legal system has to really deal with the fact that, despite someone's effort to locate the owner, there's going to be some cases you cannot find the owner, right? So then, and again, we're not going to discuss when that point is. When you reach that point, that's not relevant for this lesson. But what happens then? If this were to happen in our case, who would have a better claim for the pearl found on the floor? Would it be Lindsay or would it be the owner?
The owner.
So again, you're saying that if it was found under the table, then it would belong to the owner.
Well, we don't know how the pearl got there. However, when you talk about the owner, the man owns the building. The pearl lies on the floor of the building the man owns.
Okay.
That pearl could have been there for the last month, given how well restaurants are cleaned.
Right.
So,
Okay. Valid point, Jack. But Fran, I'm just going to reiterate and correct me if I'm wrong. But you said that what happened was that the owners of the restaurant did own the pearl, but they transferred the ownership to the restaurant goer.
To the patron,
Okay.
who
Okay.
then ate the food.
All right. Okay. So we'll find out the answer very, very soon.
Am I wrong?
You're gonna have to wait till the end of the lesson to find out
Oh,
the answer.
come on.
Yeah, of course. If I gave away the
I
answer
know
right
I'm
away,
wrong.
there would be no incentive to listen. I don't want you to fall asleep on me, friend. So here's case study 2. This is actually my favorite case study of all the 3 case studies. Here we go. I believe I posted this on Facebook earlier today.
In 1997, Pepsi-Cola launched the Globe Buck Contest. One bottle cap out of 565 million secures $1 million for its finder. The coveted cover surfaced in Las Vegas, where 2 co-workers contended its ownership. Cindy Allen had the cap, but Judy Richardson Yates claimed that she had bought the soda bottle and her co-worker had inappropriately taken it from her. Judy was able to prove her claim in court. But what if, instead of a workplace, the dispute had involved a home setting in which Judy had invited Cindy for dinner and set a bottle of Pepsi at her plate? Could Judy claim to have served only a carbonated drink, but not its plastic container? What do you say?
All right, so here we got another case. This happened about 25 years ago, in 1997. You guys remember ever hearing of this contest?
Yes.
Okay, so you must be somewhat of a soda drinker. Truth is, apparently it made big waves.
Coke only.
Yeah, okay. So this was a
That's a private
Pepsi.
joke.
This was a Pepsi promotion.
I don't like Pepsi.
Yeah, not a fan either. Leia won't be happy to hear what I like, what I don't like. This was a Pepsi promotion that won in, I think, 560 million caps, something like that. Is going to be a winning cap for $1 million. Now, what happened is that this woman gave her guest the winning cap. Now, who does it belong to?
The guest.
No. It would belong, it's part of the cap. So who would be left with the bottle after everybody goes? The homeowner or whoever.
Right, but right now she took the cap.
Good enough.
Are you talking about the one that you posted this afternoon at a family's friend's house?
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh.
Jack, any thoughts, or you're still thinking?
Well, the issue is somewhat confused by the initial, the initial case where two people were at a vending machine.
Right.
Uh, Now they've hypothetically, you've brought it ahead to, you're serving your guests this beverage and the cap contains $1 million prize. The initial, does who, what, again, what does the Talmud say about ownership, and can ownership then be transferred, for example, simply by passing a soda bottle to a guest? If that's the case, then the winning cap belongs to the guest.
Right.
If the Talmud says, however, that there's some rule that that means that everything on the table continues to belong to the host, then we've got that decides.
Correct. Correct.
Well, the bottle belongs to the host.
Right. So exactly. So that's a key thing here that we may talk about later, Fran, is that here it's very clear that the owner owned the bottle. And the question is whether she transferred ownership to the guest. Now, just to answer a quick question someone wrote on Facebook, where was the first case? This was in Issaquah, Washington in February of 2016.
That was the Pearl.
That was the Pearl story.
No,
Yeah.
that
happened-
happened 20 years ago.
No, that was the Pepsi promotion. The Pepsi promotion
oh.
was 1997. The first story about the Pearl was in 2016 in Issaquah, Washington. It's a
Oh.
suburb of Seattle. There is things that it should, just to be fair, we should split it between the two of them. Okay, that may be an interesting way of explaining it, but at the end of the day, that doesn't answer the question whether whether the finder is the owner or the actual previous owner, in quotes, is the
How
owner.
large was the bottle? Was the bottle 2
It was-
liter size?
I believe that it was all size Pepsi bottles. I'm pretty sure.
So it was
What
a
size?
large,
A big one?
a large one?
I'm pretty sure reading that I read that it was a regular, 20-ounce bottle.
A 20-ounce bottle.
Like,
So
like for one person.
to be shared or for one person?
Good question. Good question. So
I mean, if this is a large bottle to be shared at the table, then I would say that the host has claim.
Yeah, I agree with that.
valid point there. Definitely valid point. Okay. Let's go to our final and third case study. Here, let me share my screen. There we go.
In the 18th century, Rabbi David Pardo weighed the case of a man who provided his daughter with a dowry of clothing and ornaments, along with an aged chest in which the dowry was stored. His son-in-law later discovered smaller compartments in the chest, and behind these was an entirely concealed space. Reaching in, he withdrew old coins of value that had, apparently long ago, slipped into this hidden space. Even his father-in-law never knew they were there. Who is entitled to keep these coins? What do you say?
Sorry about that. So here we have another case. This is more of an ancient case, and we always try to bring in these cases. One ancient case, one more modern case. So here we have an ancient case over here where there was a treasure in the chest.
Clarifying the chest. The chest was only supposed to contain documents, correct?
It was actually supposed to contain. It was actually just a gift. It was just a gift to him.
But what was supposed to be in there? There were a dowry or something?
I think included with the dowry was a chest. that he
Okay.
gave. So the question is, who do the coins belong to in the chest?
Well, gifting the chest did not necessarily mean then gifting the coins, I guess.
Very good question. Does it, when you gift something to someone, do you gift everything involved, part of this piece? Does it have to be part of it? Can it be loose? Does it have to be attached, etc.? So we're going to discuss those things exactly. But in order to really understand the Talmudic viewpoint, and we're gonna have to kind of analyze this according to the Talmud, we're going to first focus on the first case study, which has the case of Lindsay finding the pearl under her table. Okay, not the exact case study, but the theoretical discussion there. If she found it under her table and she can now find the original owner, does she keep it, or do the owners have a better claim? So the key question here, and as I mentioned at the beginning of this class, is from the perspective of the Talmudic law, is whether the presence of something on the property, presence of something on the property belonging to the restaurant owners provides them with a valid claim. So we're gonna have to find out what is the process of kinyan. The word in Hebrew is kinyan. It means an acquisition. Every legal system needs to define when and how an act of acquisition has occurred, right?
And no more.
If you've ever studied law, I'm sure this is a big part of the discussion there. Now, when we shop at the supermarket, when exactly, imagine you go shopping for a bag of, for a thing of cookies, right? When exactly do you acquire this bag of cookies? Is it when you pick it up? Is it when you leave the store? Is it when you pay for it? When exactly is it yours? So, sorry?
When you pay for it.
I think part of it is when you pay for it and you get a receipt for it.
Okay,
I mean,
okay.
that seems to make the most sense. I mean, the store has then agreed to exchange currency or whatever you're paying for with, for this bag of cookies.
Okay, let's say, so just curious, let's say you're checking out a shop, right? You paid for the items. It wasn't actually bagged yet. You got the receipt. And then someone steals the item off the conveyor belt over there by the checkout. Who do they steal from? You or the store? Who has to pay you back?
Got a true stick.
The theft was from the individual, the consumer.
Okay, so in a lot of times, in a lot of situations, it really depends. It really depends. Again, stores are a little easier, but let's get into also a discussion about when do you become an owner of an ownerless item? It didn't belong to anyone else. Okay, so there's two types of acquisitions. Transferring ownership from owner A to owner B, and also about acquiring something that doesn't belong to anyone. You cannot find the owner. You find $1 on the street. When does it become yours? When you do what? When you decide it's yours? How about two people see $1 on a busy Manhattan street? Who acquires it first?
The first one who picks it up.
What if they both pick it up? So what do you have to do? What is the process of acquisition? So we're going to go through that in the view of the Talmud of Jewish law. We're going to read this in text 1 on page 86. So Jack, if you don't mind starting to read text 1, this is a quote from Rabbi Steinsaltz, one of my favorite rabbis, a brilliant, brilliant scholar, just passed away a few months ago.
Just going to say, Steinsaltz just died.
Yeah, so this is actually a quote from one of his books.
Okay, usually kinyan, that's how it's pronounced?
Yep, Kinyan.
Usually kinyan refers to a mode of acquisition. After the act of kinyan has taken place, the object is legally the property of the buyer. Neither party can go back on the agreement, regardless of any change in the market values or any unanticipated change in the article itself. Even if the object were to be destroyed while in the physical possession of the seller, the buyer would not be entitled to get his money back.
Okay.
Various modes of acquisition confer ownership depending on the nature of the object, such as mashika, pulling the article, masira, the transfer, chazaka, the performing the act of taking possession, hagbaha, lifting up the article, chalafin, exchange or barter. In general, money is not a valid kinyan for acquiring movable property. That's odd.
Yes, very interesting.
The word kinyan may also refer to taking possession of abandoned property. Hefker.
So the abandoned on the floor.
So we have a few forms of acquisitions over here, all different types of ways of making a kinyan. A kinyan is actually an acquisition. But how do you make an acquisition? You can, depending on what it is, if it's like, for example, if it's an animal you're acquiring, people used to acquire animals. They're acquiring a donkey for, for their field. They had to pull it. They had to do mishicha. They had to actually pull on it in order for the donkey to be acquired. Otherwise, just because you paid for it, it doesn't mean it's yours. You have to make a kinyan. You have to do something besides for paying for the item to make it yours. We'll discuss maybe later if we have some time why money is not considered a valid kinyan. But for now, let's leave it at that money in of itself is not enough. Now,
The beginning of this text also reminds me of the Latin motto, Caugat emptor. Let the buyer beware.
right. A lot of these rules, Jack, I'm glad you brought that up. A lot of these rules are actually to protect buyers. So the thing is that these acts themselves are not enough. Just because you tugged on the donkey doesn't make it enough to acquire it. For a kinyan to have any real validity, it has to accompany a very deliberate, this is something in the Talmud, I don't believe you have to do this in the legal systems of today. It has to accompany the deliberate intentions of the relevant parties. You have to intend to acquire it. Okay? As you'll see in text 2, Fran, if you don't mind reading text 2.
If you encounter heirless or ownerless property, even if you take hold of it, and in the case of land, even if you build upon it and fence it, you do not have the intention to, and if you do not have the intention to acquire it, it is not yours.
So here, if you don't have the intention of acquiring something, it is not yours. I'll give you a basic example. All right. You have Rachel, who has a very large plot of land that neighbors Yankel's land. Now, Rachel one day decides to build a fence around her property. Okay. And without realizing, she actually extends her fence into Yankel's property as well. Let's say 10 feet into Yankel's property. She didn't realize she made her fence a little too big. All right. Now, Yankel is someone who does not have any heirs. He does not have any children, no relatives, no nothing, and he passes away. So his property is ownerless. It doesn't belong to anyone. It's not, no one inherits that property. So Leah comes along and Leah puts a fence around Yankel's property. All right. She puts a fence around the property. And so again, she puts the fence along the property, which is an act of a kinyan, in order to take ownership of the property. She actually did it for that reason. She intended to make a kinyan. Now the fight begins, the dispute begins. Why? Who is the real owner of this parcel of land? Rachel claims that the fencing that she did should be enough to acquire it, right? She admits, I did not intend to do it when I made the fence. It was a mistake, but in the end, I actually made a kinyan. Leah says, "What are you talking about? I actually made a kinyan with the intention of acquiring it."
What
What
does
would the Jewish
intention
law-
to acquire mean? Does it mean that you intend to buy it?
Yes, but also, more importantly, you have to verbally express the intent. Sometimes your actions itself can prove that you had intention. Like for this example, that when Rachel made her fence, it's clear it was a mistake. She's not allowed to do that. She can't just continue a fence into a neighbor's property. It was obviously a mistake, or theft at the time, which wouldn't be okay either way. So when Leah came around to an ownerless property, it was clear from her intentions that she was intending to take ownership of the property. So how will the court rule? How would a Jewish court rule? Will actually grant ownership of the disputed parcel to Leah.
Leah is the defendant. Who brought the case? Was it the heirs?
Makes no difference, Jack. Makes no difference.
Makes no difference?
Nope.
But you have to have some interest in bringing a lawsuit.
Of course.
But there were no
obviously-
heirs. You said there were no heirs.
Obviously, the question would be, different whether Leah brought Rachel to court, Rachel brought Leah to court. But the point is that Leah will always walk out with the parcel of land because she intended to acquire the land. So it's not just enough to do something, you have to have the intention of acquiring it as well. Right? Now that we know step one in acquisition in Talmud law, so the list that we mentioned in text one that Jackie read about Mesira, Meshicha, Khalifin, all these different types of tugging it and lifting it, all these things is not the full list. As we'll see now in text 3, the Talmud describes how your own property can actually serve as an instrument to acquire something that doesn't belong to anyone. Meaning your own property can acquire it for you, right? Now, so how is this done? Does the property need to be guarded? Is there, can it acquire any type of item? Does the owner need to say anything, think anything? So we'll get to that in text 3. Text 3 is a very complex, at least potentially, in Talmud. There's a lot of back and forth. It's not simple, but we're going to keep it as simple as possible. Text 3 on page 88. Mark, you may not fully understand the text, but don't worry, I'm going to explain everything. It's not so, what's more complicated is actually the logic behind these laws more than the laws itself.
If you see people running to take an ownerless item on your field, it is an inanimate item, an immobilized deer or an unfledged bird, and you say, may my property acquire it for me. Your property has acquired it for you. If, however, the deer is running about normally and the bird has fledged, even if you say, may my property acquire it for me, you have not acquired it. Rav Yehuda, in the name of Shmuel, clarifies the first clause. The law only applies when the owner is standing next to the relevant field. The Talmud questions the first clause, but shouldn't the field automatically acquire the item on behalf of its owner without any other requirements? So Rabbi Yosaya ben Hanina taught that the property acquires things on behalf of its owner, even if the owner does not know that something is on the property. Why then must an owner verbally express intent to acquire the item and be present at the side of the field? The Talmud answered Rabbi Yosaiah's ruling only applies to a fenced property. The law with respect to an unfenced property is that it can only acquire an ownerless item if the owner is present alongside the relevant property and expresses a desire to acquire the object. If this does not transpire, the property owner does not acquire the ownerless item. Makes sense to me because basically, if you got a fenced-in property, you know that this is yours and you know where the boundaries are. But if it's an open field with no fences and no boundaries, then
Right.
it's open for taking.
Right. The Talmud goes a lot further than what you just said, Mark, which is that there's a very clear distinction if your property is fenced in or not. If your property is fenced in, and you can look at the chart, I believe it's in the student books as well. You guys see the chart afterwards? After text?
Yeah.
So you see the big difference between a fenced property, whether the owner is present or not makes no difference. You don't have to be present. You don't have to even intend to acquire. But at the end of the day, if it's an immobile item, something that's not going anywhere, your property automatically acquires it for you. Just by the very fact that it's sitting in your property, that this landed in your property. And again, not a bird that can fly away, an actual immobile item that becomes yours. Okay? Unfenced property, only if you intend to acquire an immobile item can you have your property own it and acquire it for you. Now, what's the logic of these laws? I think that's the bigger, the bigger question here. So, we learn here from this text that there's an additional method of kinyan. It's not just by picking something up or by pulling something. Just as lifting and pulling can acquire things, so too your own field can acquire unowned items that are present there. So this is actually called in Hebrew a kinyan chatzer. Chatzer means your property, an acquisition of one's yard. Now, however, as we already know, that a kinyan requires knowledge. That is, you have to have deliberate intention that the act of acquisition should be just that, an act of acquisition. So all of these laws that you just read, Mark, revolve around whether the sage's estimate, there's enough intention in any of these cases to render the kinyan valid.
Well, I got one question. And I'm sure goes back and forth. What constitutes a fence?
Oh, okay. So we'll get to that in a second. Very good question.
Is it just a post stuck in the ground, 1, 2,
No,
3, 4,
no.
or
No.
it has to be a chain link fence or something like that?
So very good question, Mark, because this is very important for to understand the logic behind this law.
What about the pearl on the floor of the restaurant?
Okay, wait.
Would the floor be considered a field?
Okay. So we're getting there in just a second. After understanding the logic behind this, we'll understand case A very quickly.
That was abandoned.
Right. But okay, there's immobile, mobile. Okay. When you have a fenced field or fenced property, and Mark, you asked what's fenced? Literally a fenced field with a fence that people don't just, walk in. Trespass is just not a normal thing.
It had to be a barrier then, so that people.
Yeah, somewhat of a barrier. Yes, correct.
Okay.
So the owner has a very reasonable expectation that strangers will not just walk on their property, right? So then we assume that ownerless immobile items that somehow land on the property, again, this is the owner's assumptions here. They're assuming that they're going to be there when they get home and they're going to get their hands on them, right? Basically, an owner of a fenced property effectively thinks of his fenced field as something that's going to secure things for him, right? So this mindset of the fact that your property is fenced in and going to obtain and secure things for you is sufficient intent for the purpose of kinyan, right? So your property is able to act as an instrument of an actual legal acquisition, even though you don't know whether it's on your property or not, right? And now, that means if someone were to take this item from your property, not just is he guilty of trespassing, assuming he had no permission to come on the property, but he's also guilty of theft because it automatically belongs to the owner of the fenced property. So again, a fenced property, the mindset is enough of an intention to have a valid kinyan automatically. Because you automatically assume that everything that's on this property that's immobile, obviously, is going to be yours, and you're going to be able to get to it whenever you want.
I got a question.
Go for it.
The pearl that was under the chair.
All right, we're jumping to the pearl again. Wait.
Yeah, come on.
We're getting there in just a second. Just finishing the logic here. So obviously, this logic about a fenced property will not apply and cannot apply to an ownerless bird that already flew away, right? You can't say, oh, I own that bird now, because anyone with brains realizes that just as the bird flew into your property, it can fly out of your property. It doesn't really belong to you. So you don't think of your fenced field as a protective agent for anything that's mobile. So your mind doesn't really, it sounds funny, but your mind doesn't activate your property as an instrument to acquire such things. It only, activates when it's immobile. Anything immobile is like automatically, yes, my property is, safeguarding it for me. Yeah.
In the modern world.
Yeah.
If you had a neighbor and the kids were outside playing football and the football flew into your backyard,
Okay.
okay?
Well, okay. Well, the football's is a mobile item.
Well, it'd have to fly out of the backyard. You'd have to throw it over the fence.
Correct. So such a case is it's obvious that the owner made a mistake and threw it into your yard.
Okay, so their intent was not to throw it into your backyard.
Then your property cannot automatically acquire it. That's no. We're talking about ownerless items. We're not talking about items that belong to someone that by mistake fell into your property. That's not fair. Then there's no end to that. Anyone who by mistake drops something in a property that's fenced, there it goes. It's only about ownerless items that somehow end up in your property. Your mindset is anything that's immobile is mine. Is mine.
Yeah, and they were clearly talking about food items here. I mean, this is an unfledged bird and a deer.
Yes. The examples are of food, but the concept is immobile versus mobile. So it includes
Well,
anything that's
the,
really
the
immobile.
deer is prone. It's been wounded or dead.
Correct. Yeah. Okay, so this is all about a fenced property. How about an unfenced property? Let's say you're driving down the highway and you see a big sign for sale, 2 acres of property for sale here, right? And someone buys it. So it's an open property. Anyone can walk on it. Again, maybe the guy can call on you for trespassing, but although it's obviously wrong for people to trespass, any reasonable person would assume that strangers will trespass to take an ownerless item that randomly fell into his property, into his unfenced field. When you own an unfenced property, you're assuming that if something randomly falls in there, someone will or can or just will end up taking it. So your mindset isn't really that you're going to acquire everything that falls into that property. If it's fenced, your mindset is always, yeah, why would someone trespass? Of course, it's mine. If it's unfenced, people are going to trespass. It's just the way it is, especially if it's in a public area. People are going to walk through an open field. Yeah, okay, it belongs to me. There's an owner, but your mindset isn't that someone won't take it. So you don't think of your property as a means of acquisition of ownerless items. So the only way that someone with an unfenced property can actually claim ownership of an ownerless item would be to use the other methods of kinyan that we said above, like pulling or lifting. And if someone else makes such a kinyan first, that person can make that become.
Let me ask you this: if someone puts up, people post no trespassing signs and they hang it up on the tree around their property, there's no fence. So is that considered a fence, or is that considered open property just because they hang the sign no trespassing? So
No.
if somebody's
If it-
on the property,
Okay, so good question, Mark. I would say, and I don't know the exact answer, but I would strongly assume that if it's in a very open area that people can walk through very easily, and it's a natural place to walk through, let's say it's near a bus stop. I don't know, people just trespass and stand on the field of this, property. Chances are that it's not considered a fenced property. If it's in a very private area and it just doesn't happen to have a fence around it, then yeah, that's probably considered fenced. So again, now an unfenced property, we said that you have to use the other methods of kinyan. If, however, by an unfenced field, in addition to the fact that the item is immobile, the owner is there, the owner is standing there, right? He's actually standing at the property. Then his property, his field acquires the item for him, even if others reach it first. Because when you're present at your property, you assume that trespassers are not going to, walk in there if they notice that the owner is there. So when you do that, you think of your field as a safe space that anything that's there will be retained for me. You guys following the logic here?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, presence alone is not enough either. You can't just say, anytime a person drives by his open property, that's when, it's a safe space. But when he, drives away, it's not a safe space anymore. It doesn't really make sense. It's not what really goes through a person's mind when he drives by his unfenced field. So therefore, in addition to being present at an unfenced field, the owner must become aware that something is lying in his field and on his property. And he has to consciously desire that his field should acquire it for him, right? And this way, his field would acquire the item for him, and the others who actually take it will be considered thieves. In order to legally establish that you truly had this intention, this is the final key here, you have to speak your mind to bystanders who can serve as your witness. You have to verbally express your intention to acquire something in your field. So to summarize in very simple English, in a fenced property, you don't have to do anything. It's automatic. If it's immobile, it's yours. Automatic. Unfenced property, because your mindset is not that your property will automatically, retain items for you. Therefore, you have to use other methods of kinyan. If, however, you're present, then you can use the option of it being acquired automatically, as long as you are verbally expressing your intent to acquire it. Okay. With this in mind, finally, let's get back to the answer. So let's return to the variation of the first case study, in which the pearl was found on the restaurant floor. Now, again, we're assuming that all efforts to locate the owner, assuming he didn't fall from someone's food, were exhausted already. And now it just became a question, who has more of a right to the find? Is it the restaurant owner or is it the diner? Right? So based on text 3, I want you guys to think of it this a second. This is on page 90. There's a poll right here. Based on text 3, if the pearl were found on the restaurant floor, the owner cannot be identified. Who has a better claim? Based on what we just said. And I'll give you a hint. The key here is whether this restaurant is similar to a fenced property or an unfenced property.
It's the 4 walls, it's got to be a fenced property.
You're saying because it has walls, automatically it's fenced.
I would say yes. And I would say that from what it's my understanding that the pearl belongs to the restaurant owner or owners. I mean, they haven't, they are, you pointed out that that an owner who has a fenced piece of property has an inherent right to anything within that fenced property. Ergo, the pearl belonged, using the same logic, the pearl must belong then to the owners of the restaurant.
Okay. Now the answer is, Jack, you ready?
I'm wrong, right?
Now, considering that the store is open to the public and people of all, walk, everyone walks through its doors, it would seem to be equivalent to an unfenced field, an unfenced property. Because yes, you're right that there's 4 walls, correct. But the owners, and again, let's use the logic we use. That's why it's important to speak about the logic. The owners don't think of this property as a safe place to keep their things. And they certainly don't think of this place as a place where ownerless items will definitely be left there for their taking, right? They don't think of their store as an acquisition tool. They don't, because it's open to the public. So, and therefore, the fact that the pearl was sitting on their property doesn't in of itself acquire it on their behalf. They would need to be present, which by the way, they probably were, right? Because it's unfenced, so they have to be present, and assuming they were present, but in addition, we just learned that in addition to being present, you also need to express specific intention to acquire this pearl before it was picked up by Lindsay. And that didn't happen. Lindsay picked it up from under her table with the intention of keeping it, right? So should she not be able to, assuming she doesn't find the previous owner, the pearl seems to be hers.
Well, according to Talmud, but what would be, in American law? I mean,
in American law, it's a
how would
very
this case
good
be
question.
adjudicated?
In American law, it's actually not so simple. I actually thought that it's clear if something's found on your property, then automatically belongs to you, but it's apparently not so simple. So it really depends on the specifics of the case. So to summarize, in Jewish law, acquisition is comprised of 2 components. There has to be an act of acquisition, and there also has to be the intent to acquire. Hi, Sherry.
Hi.
So your property can acquire ownerless, immobile things on your behalf, even without you knowing about it, but only if you activate that ability with the intention to acquire. And that only happens when the property is secure. And something that's immobile, an ownerless immobile object that's located on your unfenced property only becomes yours if you secure the property, A, with your presence, and you explicitly express the intention to acquire the specific item. So in the case of the pearl, of the lost pearl, that's found on the restaurant floor, which is a kind of equivalent to an unfenced property, the finder is awarded the ownership. So here we answered the variation of our first case study, right? Who becomes the owner of the pearl? The $600 pearl, Lindsay is the owner according to Jewish law, because even though the owner was present, they never intended to acquire it. They don't think of their property as a place to acquire things.
I thought the pearl was in the food and she.
No, that was a different case.
Oh,
So that was actually, so Mark is right. That was the story, but we had the variation of the case study.
oh, okay,
and
okay.
How it works with acquisitions in Jewish.
Well, what happened with the ingested pearl? Was she the owner too?
So the answer to that is the same thing over here. Regardless if you found it on the floor, if you found it in the food, the owner never had the intention of acquiring it, even though they owned the food, right? That they serve the diner, makes no difference. They never intended to acquire it. So again, key thing is in Jewish law, if there's no intention to acquire something, you do not acquire it. So it's not just about actually acquiring it, you have to have intention as well. Now that we answer the question of the variation of case study A, so before we try to apply our knowledge to the other questions we had, at the onset of our case, of our class, we need to continue our Talmudic exploration, analyzation of what it means that your property can acquire something for you. That your property can literally, you can own something and your property acquires it for you legally. So let's look at text 4. And I know, Sherry, you don't have a textbook, but we're going to read it out loud. So you have all the info here. Page 90, text 4.
Are you going to tell us the answer to the cap of the Pepsi bottle?
You bet. That's my favorite topic here. I want to get to that. I want to know who was the winner of that $1 million. So text 4 is a fascinating text. You ready for this? Friend, do you mind reading text 4?
Sure. If you find something of value buried under an antiquated heap of rubble or in an ancient wall on someone else's secured property, it belongs to you. This is because you can tell the owners of the property the article was left there by the ancient Amorites. What's an Amorite?
It's actually an ancient nation that's not around anymore.
Okay. The Talmud asks, but do only Amorites hide objects? Why can't the owners claim that they themselves or their ancestors hid it there? The Talmud answers, the law allowing the finder to keep the article only applies when the find is exceedingly rusty and thus an obvious relic of ancient times.
So this is a fascinating quote from the Talmud. The Talmud basically tells us here that if you find something, if you find something on someone else's property, even it's a secured property, but you know for sure that A, it was not placed there by the owner. B, it was not placed there by the person's ancestors, because they inherited it from them. And C, the original owners cannot be identified. Then you get to keep the item. And it formulates this rule by citing a very simple case. When you find something on the property that clearly comes from Amorites, that kind of satisfies all these 3 requirements.
I think it also said something about it having to be like rusty or old looking.
Correct. It's clear that's from ancient times. It's clear.
Yeah.
So the question is, and based on what we learned, it doesn't really make sense. Why don't we say that the treasurer's presence on the owner's secured property, literally a fenced property, why doesn't the owner's property automatically acquire it on behalf of the owner? Why can someone,
Yeah, how can they just go onto somebody's property and just take it?
Okay, so in general, the concept of trespassing is obviously not allowed. But assuming you're going to be, indicted for trespassing, it doesn't make you less of an owner. It was wrong. You're not allowed to trespass. But the ownership, the acquisition was still legal.
Oh,
It's a very weird phenomenon. Someone gave me a very good, analogy. Not sure how much it'll help, but say someone trespasses. Okay, I hope you guys don't get lost on this analogy here. Say someone trespasses by climbing onto your deck. Okay, finds your laptop on your deck, and deletes some creative writing that you worked on for the last few days. Right? Pretty annoying, to say the least. Now, is the writing deleted? That's a silly question, right? But wait, he trespassed, right? But that's a silly objection too. The fact that he did something wrong doesn't negate the fact that he pressed a button that has consequences. So it's the same with the laws of kinyan, of acquisition. Sorry. Jewish law teaches us that someone makes a kinyan with intent. It is not that we as a society decide to respond to this act by granting the transfer of ownership, because if that was the case, then we would be able to refuse the transfer, right? It just won't work. What triggers the transfer is the acquisition that happens either automatically or by what you do physically. So that's why a trespasser will acquire an ownerless item if he employed and he actually did a valid kinyan. So anyhow, I'm not sure if that analogy messed up your line of thinking or made it easier for you to understand. But the fact that you acquired something, even if it's after trespassing, it doesn't make a difference. You acquired it. The trespassing is wrong. It's illegal. You could be indicted for that, but you still made a valid kinyan.
Modern day law would probably have the state acquire the items if they were of antique value. I mean,
Right. Right. That's true. Landmarks specifically. Yeah.
There have been treasures found in Florida, which the treasure hunters thought was theirs, and the government steps in and says, no, these are ancient items that belong in museums.
Right.
Or like people, like in Egypt when they broke into, they undug the pharaohs.
Tutankhamun.
Yeah.
Right. Right. So the question still remains: why, in the case of an ancient treasure find, why doesn't the fact that the owner secured property, why doesn't that acquire it on behalf of the owner automatically? That's the real question over here. So because it's a little late, we're not going to get into the actual text, but there's two of the greatest scholars, which in text 5a and text 5b, feel free to read it. It's two different answers, and the gist of their answers are, it sounds similar, but it's actually very different for different, not going to get into details now, but feel free to read the additional readings at the end of the class. Is that answer number one is that hidden treasures aren't expected. It's not a common find. When you own a property, when you acquire a property, when you buy a home, you don't acquire things that are uncommon to find on the property. They're just not acquired. So because you did not expect to acquire the treasure, because it's not a usual find, you can only acquire something that you intend to acquire, but you don't intend to acquire anything that's uncommon. So
wait
if
a
the
minute.
buyer and seller didn't have in mind to acquire it, or the seller didn't have in mind to give it over, and the buyer didn't have in mind to acquire anything that's extremely uncommon, then it cannot be part of the transaction.
it's
What do you think,
crazy.
Yeah, it's true, but because according to Jewish law, one of the key components, if not the number one component of acquisition, is the intent. It's all boiling down to the intent. When you purchase the house, you do not have the intent. Again, unless specifically you wrote in the contract that if I find a treasure on this property, it belongs to me.
So what you're saying then is you bought your house over there in Shelton, and if you were digging up your pool, putting in a pool or whatever over there, and you found something that was of significant value, that's not yours. You can't acquire it.
Oh, if you find on your own property, basically whoever finds it on your property is the owner. If you find it, then lucky you. But if someone random trespasses, Even
So
though,
if somebody down the street came up and they said, oh, I see you're putting a pool. I remember that somebody had something over there. I'm gonna go look for it, and trespasses on your property and goes to dig it up and they find it, it's theirs.
correct.
Well, by the same
It sounds
token,
pretty wild.
what if what if a contractor finds it? You know, the guy
So-
digging up the ground for the pool.
Good question, Mark. Let me just finish Sherry's comment there.
Okay.
The answer to that question though is not as simple as I made it sound, because if your neighbor comes to you and say, "Oh, I remember under that pool they always said there's a treasure there," then your intention right away is going to be, as an owner, say, "Okay, I intend to find that," or you'll say, "I don't care. Let this guy go. Let him go find his treasure." So if your intent right there and then is that you want to acquire it, then it's yours.
Okay,
So again, because you're the owner of the property, it's a
I get
secure
it.
property. But if you say, "Oh, let the guy go," then yeah, then it's up to him.
oh yeah, now I see what you're saying.
Okay, so that's number one. It's an uncommon find. So that's why, even though you found the treasure, it's because it's uncommon. It was never part of the transaction. The second answer is that because it's unlikely to be found, anything that's unlikely to be found is also not automatically a part of the purchase of a property. When you acquire something, if it's not likely to be found, it's so unlikely, you don't, unless specifically stipulated in the contract, you don't have the intention of acquiring it. And because you don't have the intention of acquiring it, either because it's not common or because it's unlikely you're going to find it, therefore your property itself does not acquire it for you. You have to intend it to acquire it specifically.
Right,
about-
that means
what about-
anybody.
What about the meteorite landing on your property in that one lesson?
Okay. So that's okay.
You're not home, the meteorite lands. I mean, can you claim ownership to this valuable piece of,
Yeah.
whatever?
Meteorite.
So it's a very good question. Just to give you the quick answer, I'm not going to get into the details of why.
Please,
Um,
quick.
The first one about the fact that it's uncommon, he would rule that that you did not acquire it because it's not part of the common find test, right?
Well, it certainly wouldn't be, it would be very uncommon.
Very uncommon. So the land can only acquire on the owner's behalf once one of them becomes aware of it. But if someone, managed to employ one of the other types of Kenyans before this knowledge occurs, it belongs to the finder because it's uncommon.
What if you found a Pepsi bottle cap in the
Oh,
field?
okay.
Oh,
So we're getting there right here, right
tell
now.
us the answer.
All right, but just answering about the meteorite, the second answer about it being unlikely to be found, the second answer would say, of course you acquire it because he applies the likely, finder test, and the owner will definitely chance upon this, fantastic find when they get back. So its presence on a secure property, is enough to acquire it on behalf of the owners. Anyhow, without getting into details, that's the difference between the two answers. I don't want to get into the difference there, but the point is that it's all boiling down to, was it part of your intention to acquire it or not? Now that we understand the important principles that revolve around the treasure found in an ancient wall, let's return to our case studies. So let's begin with the last one. I know I'm leaving the best one for last. But let's begin with the last one, the coins in the chest. A
The
key
what?
issue, the coins in the chest,
Oh,
with the father-in-law who gave his son-in-law this dowry along with the chest, and he found the coins in the chest. Oh my gosh, who is this? I don't know. So a key issue is going to be when and how the father of the bride got this chest. Now, let us assume just for a moment that he purchased it or he got it as a gift, right? From someone else, you can't find the owner. So in this scenario where you don't know the owner, the old age of the coins kind of indicate that these were not the father-in-law's coins that fell back there. They belonged to a previous owner. But now the question is, and this is going to answer all our case studies, did the father-in-law acquire them along with the purchase of this chest? Was
No.
he really ever the owner of these coins? Right?
I don't think so.
Of course not. Because not just is it so uncommon and unlikely to be found, he never had the intention to acquire that. When he purchased that chest, he never intended to acquire the coins. Right? So
Right.
it definitely fails the common find test and the likely finder test. He had no inkling whatsoever about the coins. It's so unusual, so uncommon, and so unlikely to be found. Right?
So
Just
cut-
as a side
cut-
point, and you can read this by yourself in text 6, if he
So-
happened to get it as an inheritance, let's say the founder got it as inheritance from his grandfather, let's just say, inheritance specifically does not require any specific type of kinyan. You don't need, it's inheritance is automatic. You don't
Okay,
have to do something.
cut to the chase. What happened to the coins?
Okay. So now let's examine the owner in case study A just for a second. I know I'm really teasing you guys, but in case study A about the pearl that's found in the seafood, did the restaurant owner ever own the pearl?
No.
He
Right?
didn't own, he did, he intended to find a pearl in there. Didn't he? I mean, all oysters.
Well,
have
did the
pearls,
restaurant
usually.
owner ever own the pearl in the first place?
No.
No,
Right. Even though they bought the food from a seafood supplier,
and
right?
even though that they know that oysters have pearls in them,
Correct.
He
Yes.
had
That's like an
he had no intention of
No
buying pearls.
intention. Why? Because it's so uncommon and so unlikely to find them that any owner of a sushi store or of a seafood store never intends to acquire it. Of course, they'll be happy to find it. Of course they will, but they never really became owners of that pearl.
So we
And
were
because-
right.
Yes. So therefore, when
Yeah.
Lindsay was sitting and biting on that clam, she bit on an ownerless pearl. It didn't belong to anyone. So it doesn't belong to anyone. As long as Lindsay has intention to acquire it, there she goes. She's ready to go. So it's legally hers.
so she can't sue anybody for her broken tooth or.
Well, that, by the way, that's actually a very good question. I didn't think about that.
She didn't break her tooth. She said she almost broke her tooth.
No, but it's actually an interesting question. If she hurts herself, I didn't think of that. Because it doesn't really belong to the owner.
So you could really argue that in court
Yes.
if you really wanted to. It didn't belong to me, so.
On the other hand, the restaurant owner is responsible to its patrons for providing food which is not only wholesome, but safe to eat.
Yeah, to say the least. So now let's revisit the final case study, the second case study, okay? Now, in this case study about the soda that was opened by the guest, did the homeowner, this is the key question here, did the homeowner ever own the winning cap?
I don't know the story of this one.
What happened was that Pepsi made a massive promotion, and 1 in 560 million soda caps of Pepsi in 1997 had a winning cap that you would win $1 million. Someone bought it without realizing it was the winning cap, and at a party at her house, one of her guests, she gave it to one of her guests, and her guests found it. So who's the owner of the cap?
Was she
Oh my
intended? Did she buy it with the intention of just serving her guests? Or did she buy it for the intention of winning
Okay.
the contest?
Okay, so very good question. We can easily argue both sides of the aisle here, and let's let me show you how. This is what Talmud does with these things. Whether we use the common find test or the likely finder test, I think a pretty good argument can be made here that the homeowner did own the winning cap even without knowing it. How so? Let's apply the common find test, right? So our first reaction is going to be that finding the winning cap is obviously, highly unusual. It's almost as unusual as finding a treasure hidden in your wall.
Right.
You have to remember the logic behind the common find test. Is that something that's so highly unusual is not on the purchaser's mind, so therefore it can be part of his kinyan. But when you were in 1997, okay, anyone buying a Pepsi during those few months, I can almost guarantee you that they definitely had it on their mind when they purchased a bottle of Pepsi that it may be a winning cap. So you can't say it's uncommon because it's definitely common. Of course it's on their mind. They definitely had the intention. I mean, sorry, it's not common, but the logic of the uncommon doesn't apply here because they definitely had the intention.
Because everybody that bought a Pepsi says, oh, maybe I got the $1 million.
Right. So
So why give your guests Pepsis that aren't uncapped?
good question, good question, good question. The question is why she would do that. I wouldn't if it was $1 million, promotion.
I would have
I
taken those
doubt
caps
I would
off.
ever give out any bottle of Pepsi to anyone. Um, you know,
I
but
would have taken those caps
know-
off for sure.
even if knowing the odds, the host had no personal hopes of being the winner, you can make a pretty solid argument that she would have at least been aware of the promotional campaign because there was crazy advertising going on at Pepsi. So perhaps, this case passes the common fine test, right? So when she bought the soda or when it was present on her property, she acquired the winning cup, right? And when you apply the likely finder test, it seems pretty clear, actually, that the homeowner acquired the cap as well. Because when she bought the soda in the store, it was pretty much inevitable that she was the one who was going to find the winning cap, right? It was definitely, very high likelihood. The fact that she happened to have a guest who found it, and the fact that she gave this specific bottle to a guest doesn't make it unlikely now. On the contrary, more likely that she would have opened the bottle. So it passes the common fine test and the likely fine test, right? So that being said, that she would be the previous owner, the guest does not have ownership of it.
Well, and it's likely she's consuming the Pepsi in a backyard which is fenced. So
Right. Also true. Also true.
It's funny.
Yeah. Just going to do this quickly because it's an interesting. If you look at Tech 7A and Tech 7B, this was just a follow-up question that in
7A.
case study B, we said that the homeowner acquired the winning cap, right? And in case study C about the treasure chest, we said that if the chest was an inheritance, then the father-in-law owns the coins that are buried there, right? So with regard to these two cases, we asked, should we say that the homeowner forfeited ownership by giving the drink to a guest? Should we say that the father-in-law forfeited ownership by giving, by gifting away the chest? In other words, if you give away something that you didn't intend to give, did you really give it?
I that kind of like happened to me one time where I had a very, it's not that expensive, but I had a very expensive Gucci bag that we were having a tag sale. And for whatever reason, my husband put it out there because it wasn't included in this stuff, but it was on the side in my house. He put it out there and it was given away by mistake. Now, if I had known who it was, I would have went to them and said, that was a mistake. You shouldn't have gotten that because you're talking about a $350, $400 bag. And, that he gave to for $5, and she bought it for $5. So maybe this isn't really a good simile, but I would have wanted that back.
Of course. The
That was a
issue is that she purchased it.
But
If it
she-
was-
We bought you a new one.
So she purchased it, so that is a little different.
Yeah, a purchase is a big problem for you because she actually acquired it. A
Yeah.
gift. The question is, if you never intended to give the gift, did you
Right.
really give it or not? So I'm just going to read very quickly text 7A on page 97. It says, when selling a field, if it contains a well, a cistern, or a dovecote, whether they are still in use or impaired, they are not included in the sale unless the seller clearly stipulated that they are. This is all said concerning a sale, but if one makes a gift of the field, the gift includes all the field's contents. Continue text 7B. The reason for this is that a gift giver is usually more generous than a seller. Therefore, things that are not an essential part of the field will be a part of the gift so long as they are permanently fixed to the field. However, if there's money or loose grain in the field, these are not part of the gift. The author of the Mishnah did not even need to say that they were not part of the sale because that much is obvious. And unless stipulated otherwise, such things are not part of the gift. So the underlying principle is that a sale or a gift only includes what the seller or giver had in mind.
So in other words, if you have a fur coat that you just give it to a church and you
And
didn't
had
know,
a $50 bill in there.
and it had money in the pocket, and you didn't know it, and more than 50, let's say it had $5,000 sewn into the lining. And then somebody tells you about it, you go there, you didn't mean to give it to them, but are you expected to get that back?
Yes, 100%. 100%, because you never intended to give that gift.
Okay,
Now, obviously, we can say that a gift giver is usually more generous than a sale. The fact that you're giving it away, you don't care as much. The I already lost my train of thought. Okay, but the point is that it only really goes after what you intended to sell or to gift. So in very short summary here, we concluded that the restaurant owner never owned the pearl, whether it was found in the fish, whether it was found on the floor, they never owned it. Also, the host seems to have acquired the winning cap if she was aware of the campaign. And by the way, just so you know, the jury did rule, there was a lawsuit. The jury did rule in favor of the host. She got
Wow.
the winning cap. And as well as the father who gifted the chest never owned the old coins, unless he inherited the chest. So when the host did acquire the cap and the father did own the coins, their ownership stands, despite giving away the drink and the chest, because they never intended to give away the treasure. So that's the answer to our case studies. And I think that something that we can really learn, I always like ending off with a lesson. When you're learning something in Torah, it's not just an intellectual study, but it has practical life lessons to teach as well. From a spiritual perspective, everything around us is a chest with a hidden treasure inside. As Hasidic teachings taught us that every object that God creates in this world has a divine spark embedded in it. And by using this mundane object for a good deed, for a mitzvah, you elevate that divine spark. So for example, if you have a car, a car is a very mundane thing. Yeah, you can just go to work or you can go to the store. But if you use the car to, let's say, help someone do their groceries, to do an act of kindness, that's taking a mundane item and making it holy. When you buy a nice suit, right, and you just wear a nice suit because it's nice, of course, there's nothing wrong with that. But when you take the suit and you wear it on a Shabbat or a holiday day, that's using it for a mitzvah. You're actually elevating the divine spark in every item. And our job is to seek out the divine spark in everything that we see. And it's a lot easier said than done to always look for how can we use something so mundane and make it divine, make it holy, make it good, make the world a better place by finding and using out all of the mundane things we have in our life and using it and uncovering the treasure that is hidden inside each and every item. Next week, we're going to this, and next week is not going to be next Tuesday because I'm actually going to be in Florida together with my family in Florida by my sister in Venice, Florida.
nice.
We're going to spend some time there with my family for the second half of Passover. So it's going to be on April 6th, next class. Next week, we're going to discuss, any of you guys familiar with Pokemon Go?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
The kids game?
It was more than just a kid's game. It was a very, very, very famous game. Definitely a few years ago.
Is that thing with the little circles, the little circle things?
Those are Pac-Mans.
That's Pac-Man, I think.
No, they were like little discs.
Yeah,
Were
I
those-
know what she's talking
Yeah.
about. I forget what they're called. My son used to collect.
Yeah,
them.
they had cards.
Dogs?
Pokemon Go was an app. It basically allowed users to interact with virtual, Pokemon characters, and
Oh,
and they kind of placed virtual characters in random areas in the world.
You're
And if
supposed
you
to find the
went-
place.
Yeah, and if you went to that location, you got the virtual characters. So what
Oh.
ended up happening was that people started placing virtual Pokemon Go figures in private properties. So
I know what you're talking
Pokemon
about.
Go, fanatics were breaking into people's backyards to get these Pokemon Go, virtual figures.
Oh my God.
Something crazy. So the question is, does responsibility? So there was a major lawsuit. Someone sued Nintendo, says that you can't do this. It's a breach of private property and privacy. Who's responsible? Does it lie with the users who play the game, or should the owners of Pokemon Go be held responsible for the crimes and the damages that were caused by their platform? So we're going to discuss that in next class. Who's really responsible for that damage? But good
Oh,
to see you
wow.
all, and
Nice
we'll
to
see you
Hi,
April 6th.
Fran.
Hi, Sherry, how
A
are you?
happy and kosher Passover.
Happy Passover to
Happy
everybody.
Passover.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye, see
Thank
you
you.
soon.